History remembers many corrupt rulers, but few carried their sins beneath the crown of the papacy itself. Alexander VI was not just a pope. He was the symbol of everything the Church was meant to resist: greed, lust, and the pursuit of power at any cost. His scandals were whispered across Europe, turning faith into mockery and planting seeds of doubt that would soon explode in the Reformation. To his admirers he was cunning, to his enemies he was monstrous, but to history he became unforgettable. This is not the tale of holiness, but of the most perverted pope in history. Rodrigo Borgia was born in 1431 in the small Spanish town of Zataiva, a place far from the center of church politics but close enough to ambition. His real opportunity came when his uncle, Alonso de Borgia, was elected pope in 1455 under the name Calixtus III. With a family member suddenly sitting on the papal throne, Rodrigo's path toward influence was secured. At a very young age, he was appointed as cardinal and vice-chancellor of the Church, positions that carried enormous wealth and authority. These roles were not earned through holiness or years of service but were handed to him through nepotism, the practice of favoring relatives. Even in a time when such practices were common, Rodrigo's rapid rise stood out. His charm, education, and sharp political mind made him a figure that others could not ignore. From the start, Rodrigo wasn't chasing holiness. He was chasing power. In the 15th century, Rome was a city full of contradictions. On the surface, it was the heart of Christendom, with pilgrims traveling from across Europe to see holy relics, attend Mass, and seek forgiveness. At the same time, the city was drowning in corruption and vice. Political assassinations were common, and many positions in the church were openly sold to the highest bidder, a practice known as simony. Brothels operated openly in the streets, some even owned or protected by clerics who profited from them. Power in Rome was not just about faith. It was about wealth, family alliances, and survival in a dangerous political game. This was the world Rodrigo Borgia entered, and it suited him perfectly. He had the ambition, the charm, and the willingness to bend the rules. But even in a city accustomed to scandal, Rodrigo's conduct shocked everyone. As a cardinal, Rodrigo Borgia lived more like a nobleman than a servant of the church. He openly kept mistresses, the most famous being Venanza Catanii, with whom he had several children. Unlike many clerics who tried to hide such relationships, Rodrigo was bold in acknowledging his family. Giovanni, often called Juan, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey were not secret figures. They were raised with wealth, education, and the privileges of power. His open defiance of celibacy rules drew sharp criticism, even from within the church. Pope Pius II once wrote a letter rebuking Rodrigo for hosting lavish banquets where women were invited and where the atmosphere was far from religious. Yet despite the warnings, Rodrigo showed no signs of changing his behavior. His lifestyle was a clear message that he valued influence and pleasure over church discipline. If this was Rodrigo as a cardinal, what would happen once he became pope? When Pope Innocent VIII died in 1492, the cardinals gathered in conclave to elect his successor. The process was meant to be guided by prayer and the Holy Spirit, but in reality it was dominated by bribery and promises. Rodrigo Borgia used his immense wealth to buy support, offering gold, estates, and high offices to those willing to vote for him. His strategy worked, and he was chosen pope, taking the name Alexander VI. Rome greeted the news with parades, fireworks, and public joy, since many believed he would bring strength and order to the city. At first, Alexander made efforts to reduce crime and restore discipline in the streets, actions that gave hope to the people. Yet these reforms were only surface level. Behind the scenes, his real focus was not on spiritual renewal or moral leadership. But reform was never his true goal. It was family power. Once secure as pope, Alexander VI turned his attention to building the power of his family. Giovanni, his eldest son, was given the title of Duke of Gandia and placed in positions of influence across Italy. Cesare, though originally trained for the church, was made Archbishop of Valencia and later a cardinal, an unusual path for someone so young. His daughter Lucrezia became another instrument of power, as her marriages were arranged not for love but for political advantage. Through her, alliances were made and broken to suit the Borgia interest. Alexander's papacy became less about guiding the church and more about raising his children into rulers and nobles who could rival the established dynasties of Europe. Every decision seemed to revolve around their advancement. But family loyalty would soon turn into tragedy. In 1497, tragedy struck the Borgia household. Giovanni, Duke of Gandia and Alexander's favored son, suddenly disappeared after a banquet in Rome. Days later, his body was pulled from the Tiber River, riddled with wounds. The murder shocked the city and devastated the Pope, who locked himself away in grief and even considered giving up worldly affairs. For a brief moment, Alexander seemed to turn toward reform, calling for cleaner governance and a renewal of spiritual discipline within the Church. He wept openly and spoke of the emptiness of earthly power, appearing as if the loss had changed him deeply. Yet this new direction lasted only a short time. Within months, the Pope returned to his old habits of indulgence and political maneuvering. Giovanni's death left a void in the family's ambitions. One son was lost, but Cesare was waiting to step into his place. After Giovanni's death, Cesare Borgia quickly emerged as his father's new hope. Originally placed in the church, Cesare shocked Europe when he resigned his position as cardinal, something almost unheard of at the time. Freed from clerical duties, he pursued a career of power and conquest. With his father's support, he formed an alliance with King Louis XII of France, who provided him with troops and recognition. Cesare began campaigns across central Italy, seizing lands and establishing himself as a ruthless military leader. His boldness, ambition, and political skill caught the attention of many observers, including Niccolò Machiavelli, who later praised him as a model of effective leadership in the prince. For a moment, it seemed as if the Borgia dream of founding a dynasty to rival kings was within reach. But wars alone couldn't fund the Borgia dream. Alexander turned to darker methods. To support Cesare's military campaigns and the growing ambitions of his family, Alexander VI turned the church into a source of income. Indulgences, once meant as spiritual pardons, were sold widely for profit, giving the wealthy an easy path to forgiveness. High offices within the church were also auctioned, with benefices and bishoprics handed to those who could pay the most. Even the red cardinal's hat, once a mark of spiritual authority, became a commodity. By expanding the College of Cardinals, Alexander not only raised money but also secured loyalty from those indebted to him. Under his rule, the papacy resembled a marketplace where salvation and power had a price tag. The corruption was plain to see, but wealth flowed steadily into the Borgia treasury. And with money flowing, Alexander allowed the Vatican to become a stage for indulgence of another kind. Life inside the Vatican court under Alexander VI was marked not by piety but by luxury and pleasure. Lavish dinners were held regularly, where food, music, and entertainment blurred the line between sacred residence and noble palace. Giulia Farnese, often called the Pope's mistress, played a central role in this world, her beauty and influence becoming a symbol of the court's moral decline. Courtesans mingled openly with cardinals and priests, while conversations were less about theology and more about wealth, alliances, and desire. The atmosphere grew so decadent that foreign ambassadors often reported back in shock at what they witnessed. For many, the Vatican no longer seemed the heart of Christendom but rather a stage for excess. Yet even these nightly indulgences were only a prelude to something far more scandalous. All of this was leading toward one infamous night in October 1501. The most infamous scandal linked to Alexander VI is known as the Banquet of Chestnuts, an event described in the diary of Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies. According to his account, in October 1501 the Pope hosted a gathering in the Vatican that turned into an open display of lust and indulgence. Around 50 courtesans were invited, and after a feast, they were said to crawl on their hands and knees to collect chestnuts scattered across the floor, while guests watched and laughed. What followed was a contest in which men competed in sexual acts with the women, with fine garments and jewels given as prizes to those who performed the most. What made the account even more shocking was the claim that not only Pope Alexander but also Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia were present. For critics of the Borgias, this episode became the ultimate symbol of their corruption and moral decay. But could such an event really have happened? Historians remain divided over the Banquet of Chestnuts. Some take Johann Burchard's diary at face value, noting his role as master of ceremonies and the detail of his account. Others argue the story was exaggerated or even fabricated by enemies of the Borgias, since Rome at the time was full of gossip and political slander. A few diplomatic letters from foreign envoys mention the Pope's shocking behavior, suggesting that something scandalous did take place, even if the details were distorted. Regardless of whether the event happened exactly as described, it captured the imagination of Europe and became a lasting stain on Alexander VI's reputation. The tale fit perfectly with the image of the Borgias as corrupt and immoral, which made it difficult to dismiss. Even if exaggerated, the story's impact was devastating for the papacy. Alexander VI died in 1503, likely from fever, leaving behind a papacy defined by excess and scandal. His son Cesare, once feared across Italy, quickly lost his power without papal support and spent his final years in exile before dying in battle. Lucrezia, who had been a pawn in her father's politics, eventually settled into a quieter life as Duchess of Ferrara, remembered more as a patron of the arts than as the scandalous figure of earlier rumors. Alexander's successor, Julius II, worked hard to distance himself from the Borgias. He commissioned artists like Raphael to decorate new papal apartments, deliberately leaving behind the rooms once used by Alexander. Yet the memory of the Banquet of Chestnuts and the stories of papal corruption endured. For reformers like Martin Luther, such tales became proof of the Church's deep moral decay. The Chestnuts were swept away, but the stain on papal history remains.